We are very privileged to have Dr. Paul Kariuki addressing us today. Kariuki is BirdLife's Regional Director for Africa and has been engaged in bird conservation for over 25 years. Kariuki will be talking to the challenges to bird conservation in Africa, as well as some of the solutions that BirdLife and its partners are implementing to curb threats to our precious birds.
Hello, everybody. It's great to meet you all, and welcome to my short presentation on evolving challenges and approaches to bird conservation in Africa. I'll start by introducing myself. I am Paul Kariuki Ndang'ang'a. You can call me Kariuki. At the moment, I'm the interim regional director for Africa at BirdLife International. But on a normal day-to-day work, I'm the head of conservation, viewing this interim role. I'm quite happy to have been invited to make this presentation about this subject. And in fact, the title of the talk itself, Evolving Challenges and Approaches to Bird Species Conservation in Africa, I can also use it to introduce myself and my journey to getting engaged in bird conservation in the continent, and the challenges, especially the capacity challenges that I've gone through, all that I've overcome. And that journey, in the past years, brings me to where I am, and I've been able to see how things have been evolving. So just starting from the fact that as a young African individual wanting to be involved in biodiversity conservation and choosing a course to study, a university course to study, and one of the choices of the courses of my choice was wildlife management, which I got into. And going in there, I didn't know there was anything in particular within that course that could be having a subject about bird conservation. And within it, I found there is ornithological studies about birds. Not at all had I thought I would be doing as a career bird conservation. In fact, in my community, it would have looked strange to be a person spending his day-to-day work, day-to-day life just dealing with birds, Then within it, at the end of it, when I completed the course, the undergraduate course, I find myself, because of the journey of working with lecturers who are also researchers, directing me to do research on birds and connecting me with an institution within the country that has had a few researchers who are studying birds. And that's the National Museums of Kenya, and it had a department, ornithology department. That is the mid-1990s, late 1990s. And the subject then of conservation of birds, although it had been mentioned too, the challenge then was mostly, one, where to start from in the country and also in the continent, because I grew up in Kenya, and that's my resident country. Growing that country, then there is knowing that there's so many things that needs to be done for conserving birds, over 1,000 species of birds found in many places which are important. One of the biggest challenges then was prioritization. The other big challenge then was capacity, because most of the people who know more about the study of birds were mostly, there was a good number of who were coming from outside the continent and outside the country. And so there is the issue of building capacity locally to have enough people to do the work. So I think as I joined the career of bird research and conservation then as an intern within the museums of Kenya, the priority then was to, one, know where are the priorities in terms of localities, in terms of the subject of issues to first deal with, in terms of conserving birds in the country within Africa. So I found myself spending a big part of my internship, because I started as an intern, going through literature to help in compilation of an important bird and biodiversity areas of Kenya directory. So at that time, late 1990s, the main subject was the important birds and biodiversity areas program. That is identifying priority places where we can start from in terms of conserving birds in the continent, in the country, internationally, and they were. So I found myself very much involved with that program and in collecting information that was useful in actually developing a director of IBAs. I will call them IBAs from now onwards, IBAs for the country. So prioritization, and within those IBAs, then there needs also with prioritization within priorities. Then capacity building. That is to a journey that I have seen going, because the conservation of birds in the continent requires different types of people. There is the amateur bird watchers going out to look out for birds. They bring very important information. So the members of societies in various places, in the various countries, members of societies and organizations who are willing to volunteer and go get that information. Then there are those researchers that I talked about. But then my journey started as a researcher, and especially collecting information to fill gaps of knowledge of particular species of birds. So researchers are important. But after that, I found myself being asking myself, this information, how useful is it if it is written into nice papers or reports? Where does it end in terms of making a difference for the threatened species that I'm studying, for example? So I found myself then working for contributing information to eventually now as a research scientist, contributing information to the BirdLife partner in the country where I am based. That's Kenya. So I found myself working very closely with the BirdLife partner in Kenya, Mr. Kenya, taking that information and participating in action planning processes for species, providing that information so that it can be useful information. But that's how, at the end of it, I found myself then moving to BirdLife International, the Africa regional office, or what you call the Africa Secretariat, to lead the species program. So you are finding now, as you grow, there are different types of people that are required. They are the researchers, they are the interns, they are people volunteering information. But then you need also people who have management skills to manage the programs. And during my time at BirdLife International, I've also found that bird conservation, and everybody I think here knows, is not only done by the specialists or the people who are very passionate about birds, but even people who have different skills. For example, people who knows much to do with the forest conservation, for example, the habitat. People who know about how to have policy engagements, and of course, now growing also to the leadership. I mean, work in bird conservation goes beyond just doing the nitty-gritties of moving things on the ground, but also making sure that there is proper leadership so that it make a difference at higher levels. So, I'm Kariuki, and so I'm based at the Nairobi office of BirdLife International. I can't say much about this talk without saying about the organization that I work for. I work for BirdLife International, and BirdLife International is a global partnership for nature and people. It's a partnership of various organizations which are unique and independent, operating nationally most of the time, and they have joined together towards the same mission. And the mission is to conserve birds, their habitats, global biodiversity, working with people, and also considering sustainability in the use of natural resources. Every time this partnership of organizations, they develop a strategy, a 10-year strategy together, they agree upon, and which they deliver together. Here, this fair is hosted by BirdLife South Africa, who is one of the partners of BirdLife International, composed of a family of over 150 national partners, and they cover all the continents, they cover all the landscapes and seascapes. And in Africa, we have been having, a growing partnership of currently now standing as 26. We have just this year been joined by one of the partners rejoined by one of the partners in Tanzania. And so we have a partnership of 26 partners across 25 countries in Africa, whereby we have BirdLife national partners, but also we work across other countries which are not yet represented by partners through projects. We are covering about 40 countries. And as I said, I work at the secretariat that services those partners. Just to dig into the actual talk, when we talk about the approach that I'm going to use when I'm going through this is first to look at the mostly the boring lessons from the BirdLife partnership. Secondly, I'll also go through three main aspects: the science element or data element. Then I'll go to the implementation side and also the engagement side for conservation. And I'm mostly focusing on species conservation. And you can't talk about bird species conservation without knowing which species do you have in the continent. So in Africa, the current, because there are different checklists that are used at different times, but the standard checklist we're using at BirdLife International, which is often reviewed based on taxonomy, is saying we have 2,523 species. There are different levels of threat as assessed through the IUCN Red List system, for which BirdLife International is the Red List authority for birds, and we do read this process every year of finding out where do different species of birds fall in terms of their level of threat. So at the moment in 2022, and we have 20 species which are at the highest level of threat, which is critical endangered, meaning they are very close to extinction if nothing is done in the next few years, next 10 or so years. and quite a number of them are listed as endangered, 108, and another set as 442 as vulnerable. So those three categories form the threatened species, which is about 11% of the species in the country being listed as threatened. But also there are species for which we don't have enough sufficient data to be able to categorize them into the various categories of threats as recognized by the estimate risk. So they are data deficient, meaning they are still limited data for making those judgments between species. And you can see that the continent compared to the Americas, you can see where the most richness of the species is found, and also where the most threatened species are found, that you can see in the graphs, in the illustrations on my left. So let's look at how the science or the data side of things has been evolving over time, at least the time for which I've been aware of what's happening about bird conservation in the continent. And as I said before, when I was talking about my journey, I mentioned about prioritization. So, and also before you are able to prioritize where to start, then you also need to know much about the species you are talking about. So I think in the earlier years, 1980s, 1990s, quite a number of publications came in trying to pull together the information about just basic information about birds. I think one of the biggest gathering of the information about birds of Africa is those big handbooks, 8 of them, Birds of Africa, which have very detailed species accounts about not only the biology of birds, but also their distribution, and also what are the issues facing them. Very detailed description, and this has been helpful, very helpful in terms of bringing together the knowledge about birds for us. But very crucial is the red data books. Has been a series of red data books, but the initial one for the continent is the one done in 1985. The red book there, done by the ICBP, which is the BirdLife, the former name of BirdLife International, and the IUCN. That book is a starting point of knowing how to prioritize the threatened species in the Africa and the related islands. And it's that one that every other time there came other series of books trying to update it, to update what's going or to update the lists that are there. And that information continues to be updated every day, every year. And so, but this book was a good starting point for finding the information about where to start in terms of threatened species. Although there is the Birds of Africa handbook with the detailed information accounts of species, this was a good starting point, and it also helps researchers in knowing where to start to gather more information about which species to gather information for and about what, and also the conservation workers to know where we prioritize even in the respective countries of the continent. So the prioritization of species has not also only been happening within the continent of Africa, but you see from here that there has been attempts to continue updating ourselves on which are the priorities over time. So taking an example of starting, the production of various red data book, I mentioned the Africa one, but also following up, updating these ones with the books which are called Birds to Watch. There's Birds to Watch 1, Birds to Watch 2, and also having contents on information about the species in our continent. And later doing a very big, heavy book of quite many pages, as you can see there in 2000, The Threatened Birds of the World. And eventually realizing that every 4 years, we need to update this information. In 2004, between 2000 and 2004, there's so much information gathered about species, such that bird species, such that the accounts of the various respective species were developed, and no way you could put them now in a book. It could become very big because you can see the number of pages expected. 2005, but 225,000 pages. So doing such a big book would have been very heavy. So as it was developed with the Threatened Birds of the World, updated information and accounts, and now that one having very detailed information, that searchable information that you can search in a CD. We have gone beyond that, and now we have a searchable database that the outer world-facing side of it we call the BirdLife data zone. You can see the link there, whereby you can go in and you can search species by region, but you can find out which species in the continent are threatened at what levels. You can search which species are found in which country, at what levels of threat, whether they are migratory or not, which kinds of habitats are found there. And this has been a very good journey in terms of helping us to have information that by a search of your computer you can find much information. So we have grown from those very tough times where we have difficulty in getting the information, and you had to really buy these books and go to particular places to get them. And now information is available. From 2004 afterwards, then information is found on the data zone. And people do contribute to updating of these red data, these categories by participating online to discuss. They are invited to offer information about particular species really fit in the current condition. So we keep updating this information every other year. But through these accounts of species, the data zone that I talked about, it has information about the threats which affect in particular each of the species. And you can see that the species, the globally threatened birds in the continent of Africa, of course, are affected by the various types of threats. I think you can see agriculture is big. You can see, for example, invasive species is also big, logging and climate change. But one thing you notice when you look at a comparison of the number of threatened species found under each of the threat categories, the threat categories there, you see that each, when you look at 5 years between 2013 and 2018, in each of the cases, the number of species affected by each of the particular threats, the number of species affected increased. So it means the problems are continually increasing for our birds, because more and more are falling into different troubles that they were not found. I can imagine that the circles there have been increasing in size from the old times that analysis was done in the same way, and most likely continue to increase. But it's not all lost. We keep trying to do what we can to save our species. And the state of Africa's birds has been deteriorating. There has been developed what we call the red list index. Basically, is a relative indication of how many, the situation will be closer to 1 if most of the species were classified at what we call least concern, that they are not globally threatened. So the more you see it being less and less than 1, then it means more and more species are falling into those globally threatened species categories. So you can see how it has been moving. I can just the graph there is just showing up to 2012, but you can imagine this has not risen. I think it has continued to drop even up to now. So the challenge continue to be there for us in the field of bird conservation. So as I mentioned before, every time we assess between years, we do ask for contributions to check is there against some set criteria, where are those our species likely to fall within the estimated risk categories. Most of the times, the changes, maybe you may find that a species will be either uplisted or downlisted from one category to the other. But most of the times, the changes are in the continents are happening due to new knowledge. Because, for example, this species, we didn't know that it was affected by this far, but somebody has made some studies and found this is a situation. So knowledge has mostly affected how these categories have been changing, and that's why this has been increasing as more people get to be engaged in the research about birds in the continent. But also another thing that has been making these changes to happen is taxonomical changes, because again there has been more knowledge gained about how the taxonomy of species are in the continent. So sometimes they are lumping of species, sometimes they are splitting of species. But what's of interest to us is the actually genuine changes. And we are mostly interested in the genuine changes, especially if they are genuine positive changes. It shows we are making a difference. And you can see, for example, here, these are examples for which there has been genuine changes to the positive side to become uplisted. For example, from critical endangered, you can see the pink pigeon there, to endangered, which is a lower threat level. Or the example of the lesser kestrel there, from vulnerable at some stage in 1994, eventually to risk concern in 2004. Or you can take the example of and you can see quite a number of these species, which are island species, due to intensive action, targeted action for these species. There has been genuine changes whereby species have their situation has improved, and we celebrate this. So it's a good demonstration that this can be done. We can make a difference. We can make a positive difference, despite the red risk index graph that was showing that things are getting well. But inside there, if we focus our attention and our efforts, and we address the main problems, things can change the positive, as can be demonstrated for us for this species here. In fact, you see most of these are mostly in the islands, in the continent, but in fact, they just 2019, I think, the northern bald ibis, which is a species, mostly not in islands, in mainlands. Intensive action has been done, very focused attention for many years to change the situation of the northern bald ibis. In fact, giving an example of in Morocco, there have been intensive programs to actually even go and guard the breeding cribs of these birds. And the sites in Morocco, for example, with the number of individuals, increasing breeding individuals, increasing consistently, such that in 2019, the species was downlisted generally for general reasons of good recovery of the species due to action. So we can't give up. So that's we'll be talking about the prioritization, mostly the red list, using a red list process, and assessing whether we are making a difference for these species. But also, in terms of the science, also there has been very important information that we need to gather about our birds, that the way we have been doing it has been changing over time. So especially the distribution information. So I do remember when I joined for the first time in the late 1990s, 1997, when I joined one of the research departments of the museums of Kenya. One of the things we are very interested in is, and we are doing every other time, is to keep updating the distribution records of birds. We had a hard copy of the book there, the Bird Atlas of Kenya there, which whenever there were new people coming in and saying they have found this species in this particular square, would come and mark and keep that record and make sure it's published. So so the atlasing of where the birds are found has been very useful information for knowing also where to focus our attention, and to know, get further information about where our species are found, and also what helping us to know, as to warn us where are we losing species at particular places or not, or there are places where there are really serious gaps in origin we need to go. And this is an important approach to understanding what we need, where and what to do for our birds, which has been historical and useful for our continent, and has been involving our time in the way we have been doing it. And it's one of the approaches that has benefited very much, not from specialists, researchers, but also from amateur bird watchers and people who bring information voluntarily, because you can imagine how difficult it will be to get people out there who are employed to go around and look for this information. So, and this atlasing has been important for various places. I know the country from where this bird-face field is one of the leaders in the atlasing work. But this one, of course, in recent times, has evolved through the use of apps, whereby people can go out in the field and collect information and feed it into their phones and smartphones, and so it's helpful, and it's really giving very good information. Of course, I'm aware, quite a number of you may be aware of the BirdLife project, the BirdLife project that's covering quite a number of a few countries in Africa. So it's really helping. So these distribution studies have also been very crucial for our continent, and we have come from far, by marking small maps, cover maps, to even to use of apps. And who knows what we are going to do in the coming years for doing this. Then what is happening to the widespread species? It's very easy also to assume that the birds that we see every other day are doing well, but without monitoring them, it's hard for us to know. But so I do remember in 2006, 2008, BirdLife partners in Africa said, yes, this monitoring of widespread common species, population of species, they are clear. It's happening in Europe and everywhere. Maybe they're having clear plans of what's happening to this. But in the continent of Africa, maybe we need to have a way of doing this. So I do remember a review that was undertaken to see there are things which are done there, maybe the garden counts which are happening in this country or the other. this species or the other which is being monitored by this group there. So a review was done on that one, and guidelines were developed for bird population monitoring in Africa. And this has been trialed and continues to be trialed through a common bird population monitoring schemes in some countries in Africa, Botswana, Uganda, Kenya, especially with the much support from the Royal Society of Protection of Birds, the BirdLife partner in the UK. And this was, as you can see, some of the work coming out of this, the graphical representation there for Botswana and Uganda, and using some indexes developed from sets of species from those countries. And what came out of that is the need for very engagement of the public and the volunteers in this, and these kinds of systems need to be expanded, but of course they require resources and careful coordination. There are lessons we can learn from Botswana and Uganda and Kenya, but efforts need to be, there should be ways of knowing how to sustain this, because these kinds of information are useful not only for bird conservation, but also the birds are very good indicators. They can tell us information about habitat changes, information about climate change. It's crucial information, and wherever you can, we need to expand these kinds of schemes. One of the challenges you have is some kind of competition within the continent of what scheme to use. You go, because the continent is wide and diverse, you go into a particular country and you find somebody has come with their system and it's more preferred there than when you go to another country. So standardization of these schemes hasn't always been easy. Then we come to planning and implementation for conservation. So you out there, you have prioritized, maybe you say this is the species that's facing challenges. There needs to be ways of bringing together the stakeholders to agree on the actions to proceed with and how to do them. So one of the processes which has been used is the single species action planning. In the early 2000s, late 1999 there, 2001, I do remember that the BirdLife partnership agreed that some of the species that for which we require attention for, they are important, they are threatened, but they require more coordination, maybe because they are found beyond one country and action needs to be coordinated wisely. So the partnership agreed, and we need to really develop our species action planning format and process, and actually plan for some of these species on what's supposed to be done. So a format was developed by the BirdLife Foundation for developing species action plans, and used for developing quite a number of species action plans for these species which are threatened, and most of the times requiring coordination between more than one country. And these were our development. But also, this kind of coordination and implementation of in planning for conservation of species is also crucial for even migratory species. And I know that the Africa Eurasian Waterbird Agreement Secretariat has also developed action plans for quite a number of the species which require close coordination across countries. And this has been useful in guiding the implementation of work on the species. For example, the white-winged fluff-tail, a species which is critically endangered, is found in South Africa, so it's found in Ethiopia. They have been their courts in Zimbabwe, but there needs very close coordination for this work to be done. So an action plan was developed for this species. Currently, it's being coordinated by BirdLife South Africa. And through that forecast work, it has helped forecast the work. One of the major challenges with that species has limited information, not even knowing whether it breeds in South Africa. And that has helped the work of BirdLife South Africa have helped to do forecast work, to really study and know that the species is breeding in South Africa. Now, the connection between the two countries is what's remaining. So it helps to focus the work, not only in terms of doing more research, but also in action. Let focus our action or single species, where a single species approach has to be used due to the uniqueness of the species. But also, there are some times where a group of species would require the same level of maybe a particular group of, let's say, seabirds or vultures that are requiring almost similar kinds of action. So you plan for them using a multi-species action plan approach. And that also has been used, and I'll talk about that one for vultures. So in the early 2000, quite a number of species action plans were developed, and they were used for training people in the continent of Africa on how to do this action planning, focused planning for saving species, and also borrowing quite a number of lessons from the island countries where there have been circumstances that have found it, have forced them to really do focused planning for how to save those species from extinction. And so this capacity was developed from this process. And even now, I've seen people who are trained through this species action process for birds. They have transferred those skills. Both the training was done by the departments, also doing the national authorities for wildlife conservation. They are using this model and their training, but obtained from that to do planning for large mammals also. The other approach that we found ourselves using, especially started in mid-2000, is Green BirdLife. We say, okay, we have partners in many countries across the globe, but there are some species which are critically endangered that sometimes are not even found in places where we have partners, and we can't simply watch as they decline and get lost when we are watching, just because we don't have partners there. But also, even in places where we have partners, we needed also to, as most of you know, is that for you to keep the momentum on conserving a species, sometimes there is need for that passion and interest and active engagement in the species, that particular species, so that you keep the attention back every time from that species, even when people are talking about something else. So BirdLife International came up with a model of using what we are calling a community of people who are calling species guardians, and another community of species of people or institutions we're calling species champions, whereby we identify particular people or institutions that are very actively interested in a particular species and working on it. We call them the guardians of the species. We officially recognize them, and we continue to support them in whatever way we can to deliver the work, and recognize them as the people who are doing really useful work for that those particular individual species which are in trouble. And where possible, linking this community of people with what you call species champions. Again, these are people or institutions or even corporates who are willing to support in terms of resources, in terms of money, a particular species, because they like that species for one reason or the other, or you have made them to like that species for one reason or the other. So there is a person or an institution who are very keen to deliver conservation of, because they are even studying it. Sometimes they are even always keeping their ear on the ground on what's happening to the species, that they can always give you the solution and they can know to guide you on where to do where to invest the resource. Then there's this community of people who are keen on providing resources for that particular species. And when you join them together, then it starts to make a difference for the species. So that model started around 2006. It has continued to work up to now. Of course, servicing these communities of people is an effort by itself. So we try to avoid to be very spread thin. So BirdLife International, the partners, and I know that within BirdLife South Africa, there are particular species guardians for particular species or groups of species. This approach has been helpful to quite a number of species and continues to be. But things have been changing. So after I joined BirdLife in 2005, just as I was starting to settle, because I was putting a lot of my effort in this species action planning and supporting the partnership in the designing and implementation of this plan. But then it's then that, of course, there are many people who are doing research, and raptors are very many experts on these species, groups of species. But people started knocking on our doors, especially after the release of a paper by Theory, who used to do monitoring of vultures inside and outside protected areas in Western Africa. And after going there often between years for 30 years, he noticed huge declines of the vulture populations outside protected areas. And now, of course, there are also other patterns which have been observed by other people, and people are knocking on our doors saying, "At BirdLife, what are you doing about vultures? It's a problem." So, in terms of action and implementation, and the continent has 11 vulture species. At the moment, a good number of them are listed as threatened globally. I think 7 of them. So he got into the business of vulture conservation. Of course, the business of research and recognizing that it's not only BirdLife International, there are other people who are doing, and the partnership who are doing work on vultures. And many stakeholders worked together to develop the multi-species action plan to conserve vultures in the African invasion region. This multi-species action plan has been guiding the work on vultures by many stakeholders, including the BirdLife partnership and various. We are learning over time. There are different sets of threats for different sub-regions of the continent in Africa, moving from West Africa, where beef-based use of vulture parks and vultures as a whole is a problem. Moving to East Africa, where we are having human-wildlife conflict issues, bringing about poisoning problems for wildlife, whereby vultures are affected. Southern Africa with almost similar issues, and sometimes related to poaching. And the different approaches are used, and there can be whole talk about vultures that I don't want to get into that. But over time, there have been changing and learning approaches. For example, use of integrated anti-poisoning approaches have been popular. Also learning some lessons from the use of vulture safe zones in Asia, bringing them to adopting them for Africa, the unique situation in Africa. And even engagement with the traditional healers in Western Africa who are known to use parts of vultures for their business. So to engage them in a positive way to see how to look for solutions. So a group of species that is showing that things can change and your focus can immediately change to something that you never expected at a particular time due to changing situations. Another set of species of interest is migratory birds and the flies which they use, which are of great interest again. And in 2000, around 2004, especially in Western Africa, there was we started to see really great interest to read it. We thought we need to really coordinate our work about the work on migratory birds. And most of the analysis that had been done around that time to mostly putting the birds into three major groups: the land birds, which use the broad front kind of migration in Africa, using, for example, the Sahel, etc., and affected by different threats. Then the soaring birds, which are mostly using the funneled approach of conservation. They are using particular bottlenecks when they are moving from their breeding areas to Africa. And also water birds, which use that network of sites for their survival during breeding passage and also wintering times. So so seeing that you can see the statistics they are using, for example, quite a big percentage of threatened species of soaring birds. Quite a big percentage of soaring birds are threatened. And they are affected by different kinds of threatened groups of birds. So as a result of this, the approach of conservation of birds using the flyway approach, coordinating of stakeholders across the flyways. Back in Africa, being coordinated with colleagues in Europe, in Asia, in Middle East, to make a difference for migratory birds. And so coordination has been very important. For example, you can see, although the migrant using the red list index, although the migrants are the level of deaths here is being seen as not as high as non-migrants, but you can see that the red list index also continues to drop for them. And some of the approaches that have been used, for example, for the land birds, migratory land birds, the songbird especially, is the development of the Africa Eurasian or Migratory Land Birds Action Plan in 2004, which is led by the Convention of Migratory Species Secretariat, and which the BirdLife partnership also contributing development, and it continues to support as necessary in its implementation. And also project-based work, especially in the Sahel, for restoration of crucial areas for birds, through engagement of people, with the livelihood projects. And in fact, at the moment, we are trying to mainstream conservation of migratory birds to the popular initiative of the Great Green Wall. See whether we can integrate mainstream of the work of conserving habitats for birds, migratory birds, using that initiative. Then for migratory soaring birds, for some time now, we have been implementing an initiative of mainstreaming migratory soaring birds conservation into the development sector. So, for example, energy. energy. We know that those big birds can easily be collide, for example, with the energy infrastructure. So this, and also even, for example, power lines. So advising the design and also the placement of this energy infrastructure in a key area of work. In fact, developing what we call sensitivity maps whereby developers can look at and say these are the areas for us to avoid because they're important for this migratory soaring birds. Also, a network of our partners have come together to come up with the East Atlantic Flyways Initiative, whereby they identify priorities of things they need to do across the flyway for birds. May it be IBA conservation, may it be building capacity of the people engaged in the conservation of habitats of these birds. And hopefully in the near future, we can also establish a similar initiative for the, for the Black Sea, Mediterranean, Rift Valley area, so that there can be a network of people working and collaborating together to implement migratory bird conservation across that area. Not to forget another important group of birds, the seabirds. Seabirds, especially in West Africa, about 5 years ago, there has been, from about 5 years ago, we have been doing intensive work there to first understand the problems facing those birds and also identify marine important bird areas for those birds. And some of the threats which have been coming about, especially bycatch, whereby birds are caught when people are fishing, invasive species, overfishing, climate change, hunting, and then just disturbance. And there has been initiatives to build capacity, to help in also putting in place measures on board, aboard fishing ships, so that this problem can be reduced. But beyond those species group focused work, obviously, birds will benefit from other very important approaches that are being used. And crucial among these ones is the important birds and biodiversity areas and key biodiversity areas approach. These are site-based approaches, and which started with the science, as I mentioned before, by identifying these areas. And in the 1990s, late 1990s, in the continent. And the work continues. Your identification, monitoring those sites, but also now focused work at those sites. This continues, and you can see one of the major steps in the continent happened is identifying of those IBAs, and a big publication of that big book with over 1,200 IBAs identified for the continent, and actually launched in South Africa. This book. But now also this information has been fed into the data zone of BirdLife, as I mentioned before. You can find this information, the site accounts of these sites on the web. And this information has been guiding our work and the work, and there are different approaches used for conservation at IBAs and KBAs, and we are moving to the approach of going beyond just bird sites, but also key biodiversity areas with the engagement of many institutions. Then, of course, there's the habitat approach, and very important is the engagement with the policy work, and also advocating and communicating our work. So, as an example, for example, is advocacy, because there are many sites which are affected by development. We have to keep track and know which sites are facing particular developmental threats, and advocate such that these sites are protected from those development sites. But a very crucial and important part of work for conserving species, and the approaches need to keep changing and are important is engaging of people. And engage people, one of the popular approaches since the times of identification of important bird areas is to use what you call site support groups, people, locally based people, and they come in different shapes and the designs. So some of these local groups could be women groups, could be stewards of those IBAs, could be a mixed group of people who have come together for not only for conservation, for other benefits that they get from grouping together, but they engage and they support at the local level to do the work for conservation of the sites, and which are important for birds and the birds themselves, and even monitoring them. And you can see a number of site support groups at different countries that we have. And in the engaging people in the various BirdLife partners we have, there's usually a trend of, because they are mostly membership-based organizations, the membership has been growing over time. You can see the example of Nature Uganda. In Uganda, they started with the very low membership, but you can't do bird conservation without engagement of people. You need to have members, volunteers, people who can talk with you, your ambassadors, as they reach out. They talk to each other, their families and friends. So the membership, it's good to see that it has been growing, although of course in the recent years this has been was affected by COVID, numbers stopping. And you know, in some countries in the continent, the culture of membership is not strong, but it's good to see that it's starting to become strong as we go. So the approaches to the challenges for bird conservation, there are many, and they keep changing. It's hard to describe them in a 40 or 45 minute talk. But this gives you an idea. We have a beautiful continent, but you have to keep thinking and engaging on how best to approach conserving our birds. You may not necessarily directly working on a particular species of bird, but the way you take care of nature in general and our surrounding is important. And I urge you all to do what you can in the simplest way next to you, and you help in overcoming the challenges that continue changing in our continent. And thank you very much. It's good to have met you all, and hope you enjoy the rest of the event. Thank you. Bye for now.
Thank you to Kariuki for a most enlightening presentation. BirdLife South Africa is privileged to operate within a family of organizations across the continent, all striving to protect birds. It is only through collaboration and cooperation that we will realize our goals, and the conservation of birds has never been more important. We have a short break in the program now to allow you to explore the virtual platform. Make sure to place your bids on the many items within our silent auction and to visit our exhibitor and sponsor booths. You can also take part in our bird search game. All of these functions can be found on the left-hand side menu on the platform. If you cannot see this menu, look for the 3 lines in the top left corner and click this to open the menu. See you back at 12 for our feature on the Mouse-Free Marion project on this feeder.